Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of MichBio U. Today's topic, title of the session will be the programmer's approach to real-world data and using real-world evidence in research in healthcare. We've got a variety of speakers from MMS Holdings who will speak to the topic. Obviously, this is very timely. There's a lot of changes that have been going on in the clinical development landscape. Everything from the technologies and the science and the analytics being used, along with the types of targets, and not the least of which, of course, the various changes in regulatory approaches and such. And so, and certainly, real-world evidence is getting a lot of attention. I just wanted to remind everybody that today's session is being recorded, as they all are, and members of MichBio can find the archived presentations on our website. If you have any questions on how to access those, just drop us an email or phone call, and we'll be happy to assist you. Also, to remind you that a couple of next events. We don't at the current time have any webinars scheduled, but that of course might change. But do want to call your attention to a Women of MichBio Lead Networking event that we're hosting in East Lansing in partnership with the MSU Foundation. You can find the details on that on our calendar events. In addition, and probably more germane to today's session, is the Michigan Drug Discovery Symposium. This is an event that we do every other year in partnership with the three research universities. And there's certainly going to be plenty of speakers and sessions regarding various aspects of the entire R&D pathway for drug development. So that's going to be held in Ann Arbor. More details are going to be forthcoming, and we'll be opening up registration here within the next week. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. As always, you can find these details through our newsletter and bio link, through our emails, and of course our events calendar on our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Hurley from MMS Holdings, who's going to take it from here and conduct the presentation.
Yes, Stephen, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Oh, and one more
Excellent.
thing, for those attending the session, if there are any questions, please submit those through the chat, the online chat, and then at the end of the program, we'll address those questions at that time.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Stephen, and the MichBio team for inviting us to participate in this webinar and allowing us to share our insights about real-world evidence. We're presenting this information through our unique technical perspectives. We're data experts and have very rich skill sets with loads of data domain knowledge, and we're highly experienced with collecting, cleaning, analyzing, and reporting data. It's from this perspective that we will share in this webinar our insights in the new landscape of real-world evidence utilization within the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, next slide. Oh, yeah, right there. So for the agenda here, I'll give a brief introduction to the panel members. We'll go through some vision and some examples. We'll talk a little bit about the framework from the FDA for utilizing RWE. And then we'll go down and we'll talk about some of the definitions, the controls, the sources, and how to get access. And then towards the end, we'll talk about our perspectives as with the opportunities that are available to us with integrating RWD with clinical data, how do you generate and report results, some various platforms, and then some of the challenges ahead, including data privacy. Okay. So we all work for MMS Holdings. It's a data-focused pharmaceutical contract research organization. Regulatory submissions are our core strength across all functions within MMS. We have pharmacovigilance, regulatory operations, medical writing. We have about 600 colleagues globally. We specialize, the ones on this panel, in data planning, collection, analysis, and reporting, the key steps leading up to the submissions. We work in a highly regulated industry, and MMS is proud that we go a couple steps over and above by attaining ISO 9001 certification for quality and ISO 27001 certification for information security. We have sponsors of all sizes across the world, and our global headquarters are right here in Canton, Michigan. Our Asia headquarters are in Bangalore. We have satellite offices other places in Asia, Europe, Middle East, South Africa, and throughout the United States. As Stephen said, my name is Chris Hurley. I've been in the industry for over 25 years. I consider myself a jack of all trades when it comes to handling and analyzing clinical data. I have a clinical and statistical programming background, and I currently manage and have been developing our data sciences department for the last couple of years. That's my day job. I'm also a volunteer. I'm America's Director of Fuse. It's an independent, not-for-profit organization. It's global and collaborative, has almost 10,000 statisticians, programmers, data managers, and technical people like us, coming from CROs and pharma within industry, regulatory agencies, standard development organizations, and academic organizations. The first up on the panel that we'll be discussing with you is Aditya Gadiko. He's been in the industry for 10 years. He's an excellent stats programmer and has a passion for new technologies and new ways of analyzing data. He's also active in the industry, as are the whole panel here. We're very active in the industry user groups and have a really good handle on the landscape of RWE. Following Aditya, we'll have Sushil Arkala and Narsima Ayalis. These two have been working in the industry for 14 and 15 years, respectively. They are both highly effective managers in our stats programming department, and both have a keen understanding of the regulatory requirements and models used for traditional trials. They also have an extensive understanding of the evolution of RWE and how it may be adapted for use. A discussion of RWE generally prompts a discussion of data privacy. Ravi Yandamuri is our last panelist here. He's been with MMS for 9 years and is one of our principal clinical programmers. Ravi is a subject matter expert regarding data privacy and has been very busy participating in the development of processes and standards internally for MMS, sponsors, and in user groups for the industry. The typical phase 3 clinical trial may collect more than 1 million data points. The industry and MMS have well-established processes and methodologies for dealing with them. But let's talk about real-world data. I read an interesting article the other day about Amgen's real-world data portal, which has been in use over the last few years. Tapping into anonymized records for more than 150 million patients, the Amgen portal gives almost instant access through queries to identify patient populations with certain diseases, medical histories, or exposure to different therapies. That's a good example of the scope and use of the information that is currently being collected daily and growing. On the slide here, you can see that as of 2017, 87% of office-based physicians in the United States, and of course nearly all hospitals, are using electronic health records to store patient data. The amount of RWD and those recording it has been growing for years. With the right analytical tools, this ocean of data can yield real-world evidence, that is, conclusions that can be validly drawn from the data. We get this question all the time. Can you give me an example of how RWE has been used at MMS? Well, sometimes to find real-world data, you have to use your imagination. At MMS, we had to think out of the box for an orphan drug application that we worked on. This application had been held in abeyance from the Office of Orphan Products Development on 2 previous occasions, based on concerns regarding prevalence in the U.S. and European Union for a disease population subset. Typically, this information would be obtained through a scientific literature search, but that search came up empty. Using actual sales data from the U.S. and shipment data from Europe for a marketed competitor, we were able to support a prevalence estimate in the subset disease population. The analyzed data effectively demonstrated that the population subset was less than the threshold of 200,000 patients required for orphan products. While the use of non-traditional data and real-world evidence is usually less often considered, we believe there is limitless potential for its continued use in drug development and global regulatory submissions. What we see so far as we are looking forward are 5 use cases emerging from real-world evidence in the benefit assessment by regulators. Companies are just starting to include RWE in regulatory submission packages that meet the criteria on this slide. In the picture at 12 o'clock in the picture, we're talking about historical controls. Sometimes patients cannot be randomized to placebo. For instance, life-threatening orphan diseases with no adequate therapeutic options. But before the advent of the electronic medical record, physicians would physically scour old patient charts to build historical controls for regulatory submissions. Now, with the advent and use of the EMR, assessment of this patient-level data on larger number of patients may provide these historical controls more easily and effectively. Sliding over to 2 o'clock in the picture regarding post-marketing. In these cases, drugs for life-threatening diseases without adequate treatment options might be approved based on strong early clinical evidence. And these would be required to complete post-market monitoring via real-world evidence only. In these disease states, some companies have struggled to recruit sufficient numbers of patients within a reasonable time frame to meet regulatory requirements for post-market randomized controlled trials, suggesting that RWE analytics may be a better approach. Moving down to 5 o'clock in the picture regarding other countries. These are cases where drug has already been approved outside of the United States. For example, after an initial rejection for an expanded indication, Novo-7, a treatment to prevent bleeding for certain conditions, was approved for those indications based on RWE that was collected through registries that were located primarily in Europe and Canada. Moving over to the 7 o'clock position in the chart here, electronic medical records can contain rich data on drugs being used off-label for medically accepted alternative uses. For instance, based on recommendations and clinical guidelines developed by physicians. Today, this data has been included in a handful of successful regulatory submissions. Moving towards the 10 o'clock position here, these are the alternative use for expanded populations. It's similar to the new indications, but these are drugs that are being used off-label for new populations. For instance, those not included in the initial approval, such as children, pregnant women, and also disease subpopulations, such as patients with less severe disease. Real-world evidence was the sole data source evaluated by the FDA for the approval in an expanded patient population of the Sapiens transcatheter heart valve. Though the gold standard is the randomized clinical trial, consideration of these 2 methods is likely to increase. There are also some early signs that real-world evidence is starting to be accepted by regulators, physicians, and patients for benefit decisions. Notably, this is occurring in a small subset of rare disease areas, such as oncology, orphan diseases, and similar therapeutic areas. Situations that support real-world evidence are typically characterized by a lack of other therapeutic options, where the condition is seen as life-threatening disease, and where it affects a small population size, and or the effect may be easily measured. So, building a framework for utilizing real-world evidence. In December 2018, the FDA published a document describing the framework for the FDA's real-world evidence program, which falls under the 21st Century Cures Act. The intent of this program is to foster engagement and promote shared learning and consistency in applying that framework, thereby assisting developers interested in using RWE in support of regulatory decisions. Applying this framework can improve the efficiency of clinical trials in any of the 6 ways described on this slide. Any discussion of the use of RWE to generate clinical evidence for a regulatory decision should also include a discussion of this framework because of its helpful guidance and examples. So Aditya will take us into some of the concepts from this framework and his analysis of the RWE landscape. Something to consider first as we move into this new paradigm of RWD is the processing power of our devices and the sheer volume of data that keeps growing. The amount of data collected in the traditional randomized clinical trial pales in comparison to the amount of real-world data that may be available. Not long ago, we thought of data in kilobytes, megabytes, and gigabytes. Then came terabytes, exadata, yada, yada, yada. Chances are the data you need is out there, but it's available in high volume. So MMS has developed a virtual platform, and other companies have their platforms that are cloud-based and have distributed processing capabilities to scale up with the rapidly expanding data and analysis needs. Now I'll transition to Aditya, who will tell you more about the provenance of real-world data.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm Aditya Gadiko, Senior Programmer at MMS. In this part of the presentation, my goal is to give you a high-level understanding of what real-world data is, what RWE is, what are RWD sources, and where can we gain access to them. And I'd also be talking about RWE regulatory framework and stakeholders in this health process. As it is very tough to elaborate on everything, I provided multiple links within the slides so that you can read in more detail at your convenience. I've also included a live example just to simplify things. All right. So everybody's talking about RWD, and can you go to the previous slide, please? Everybody's talking about RWD and RWE. So real-world data is the data generated from patients' health status, data generated while delivering healthcare to the patient, right? So data generated from patients' health status, generated while delivering healthcare to the patient. So if you think about it, it is all around us, especially in healthcare settings, right? So for example, we have electronic health records. We have, I think the most common thing we see real-world data around us are mobile devices, right? Wearables like Apple Watch, Fitbits. We use other tools like IoTs to count our steps, right? I'll talk more about RWD in the coming slides. Let's talk about what is RWE. RWE is the clinical evidence generated after analyzing our real-world data. Clinical evidence generated from RWD, real-world data for pharmaceutical drugs, usage, benefits, risk, right? So it's RWE, the evidence is generated from RWD data. So I hope this, I tried to simplify this. I think you'd get a better idea once we move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. This is like a visual representation of the RWD and RWE process. We visualized this process similar to a tree, right? So we have roots, trunk, branches, and leaves. So if you look at the roots, we have different kinds of data sources, like wearable devices, primary healthcare, post-marketing surveillance. And this RWD data can be divided into 2 different parts, right? The first is publicly available data, then private data. So public data is something we can access. Anyone can access. It's very easy to access. It's open, right? Private has personal information, right? It's a controlled environment. You need to go through a certain process in order to access the data. So once we have this data together, we have to generate evidence from this real world data. So the process includes about 6 steps. Right. First, we have to identify what kind of real-world data we need. Right? Do we need social media? Do we need primary healthcare data? Do we need disease registry data? Identify the data and collect everything together. What are our collections methods, right? Then one of the most important steps is to anonymize the data. Ravi, our in-house expert, is going to talk about it later, but we need to anonymize certain amount of data as per the requirement. And then we go on to standardizing the data as per our regulatory guidelines. Then we analyze it, visualize it, and then we put everything together, our findings or evidence, onto a sharing platform. There are multiple applications for real world evidence, like, like trial optimization, post-marketing safety, secondary indications, and also a few things Chris mentioned before. But I think value-based medicine takes a price here. Health insurance companies and pharmaceuticals companies are right now doing an amazing job using real world evidence for value-based medicine. So this kind of helps you get an overall idea of the entire process. Moving on to the next slide. So there are so, when we try to research on RWD sources, there's so many. So what I did was I tried to filter them down to 7 categories, what I felt was major. So the first one is patient registries. For example, we have European Cystic Fibrosis Society, and then we have healthcare databases, including medical or electronic health records. Transform Project is a very good example for this. Transform Project is a very good example for this, right? So whenever you have a chance, just go on to these links, check them out. They're very informative. So then we have PPRNs, patient-powered research networks. This is one of my favorites, patientslikeme.com. Patientslikeme.com is like a social network for people or patients suffering from similar kind of conditions. So let's say, for example, a person is suffering from psoriasis and he would want to get in touch with people who have similar condition, right? So just to share information, this website has wealth of information, especially when it comes to real world data. And of course, we have social media like Twitter, Facebook, regulatory agency maintained databases like FAIRS. There are a lot more. And we have data networks like Orion, pharmacy and health insurance databases, FDA's Sentinel Initiative. FDA started Sentinel Initiative way back in 2008. And this is considered to be a success. And it's been 12 years since they're running it. This is the main focus for Sentinel is drug safety. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so I promised a live example, right? So I'm sure everybody knows Twitter. If you're listening to a recorded version, just pause the video and choose a drug, your choice, right? I choose Humira over here and put that into like a Twitter into the search bar, right? So you get a lot of tweets about Humira. So when I counted them, don't quote me on this, it might change from time to time, but when I counted them, I saw at least about 8 adverse events from, like, let's say 100 tweets, right? So if you just click on the link, you just directly go on to Twitter website and you would get all the Humira tweets, and you can just go through them, you'd figure it out. Like nowadays people are, don't quote me on this, but nowadays people are more likely to tweet about their adverse events than call their pharmacist or doctor. So yeah, this is a very good place to start for real world data. And it's very easily accessible through Twitter API. But I agree, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of filtering we need to do, a lot of cleaning, but this is a good place to start. So there are a lot of other additional data sources, future data sources, like of course wearables like Apple Watch, Fitbit, and we have the link I provided takes you to Johnson & Johnson website, where they have collaborated with Apple for Apple Watch for an AFib study. That's a very interesting read. And we have FDA's My Studies app. So FDA created its own mobile app to run a pilot clinical trial, which they have successfully completed. And they have open sourced their entire code. It's on GitHub. Anyone can use it. You can customize it. You can brand it. It's basically a mobile app for clinical trials, which FDA has created. So it can get better than that, right? So we have location data. Location data can be used for socioeconomic purposes. And now we have a ton of data from voice assistants like Alexa, Google, And the final link is the National Healthcare Databases and Accessibility. This is very informative. It has databases from multiple different countries: Japan, Denmark, US, Canada, and how to access them. There is a process to access those databases. This link has everything. If you can move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we know what RWD, RWE are, what are the data sources, how can we access them. Let's move on to the regulatory framework. So as you know, regulatory agencies play a vital role when it comes to RWE. So I've just put three. There are multiple countries doing amazing work, but I filtered them down to three categories: Europe, US, and Canada. So Europe has, again, they have multiple agencies, but I feel everybody's doing good work. These three agencies stood out for me. So we have Innovative Medicines Initiative, European Medical Information Framework, European Network of Centers for Epidemiology and Pharmacovigilance. And especially IMI Get Real project from Innovative Medicines Initiative has, the website is amazing. So if you can, it gives you an end-to-end knowledge of the entire RWE process, especially for business. It's wealth of beginners. It's wealth of information. And of course, we have in US, we have FDA's RWE framework. Like Chris mentioned, they've released the framework in December 2018. They have given it kind of gives us an idea about what FDA is expecting from RWE right now. And Duke Morgalis RWE Collaborative is doing good work as well. And when Bipartisan Policy Center, so this document kind of gives us an idea of what FDA needs and what it is hoping to achieve from RWE, RWD in the next, let's say, 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, right? This is the future, the Bipartisan Policy Center. And we have, of course, we have Canada Agency for Drugs and Tech in Health. Yeah, I mean, go through the links, very informative. Next slide, please. And finally, coming to stakeholders. Stakeholders are spread across this entire process. They are very important. There are a lot of different stakeholders, but we have four major ones. Physicians and providers, who are the primary contact first contact, and we have health insurance companies, regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical or medical device companies. So these four are major stakeholders in this RWE process, and they have to come together to kind of achieve what we are hoping to achieve from RWE. So I'd like to pass on to Sushil, our in-house expert, for the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Aditya, for the great insights. This is Sushil Arkala. A very good morning to you all. And I'll be talking about a programmer's perspective in generating evidence from the real world data. Next slide, please. As a programmer of randomized clinical trials, we are used to having one data source, that is data collected in a controlled setting, and then we map that data to standards, apply appropriate statistical methodologies using validated softwares to answer the clinical question of interest. As mentioned earlier by Aditya, there are multiple sources, data sources for RWD. With all of these data sources in effect, in our opinion, below is a roadmap one could adopt to synthesize evidence of regulatory grade from the real world data. So if you see that wheel, there are 4 different steps like discovery, data engineering, algorithm and analytics, and share and decide. So one of the important steps in the process is the data discovery and ensuring data are fit for purpose. So how do we do that? So when we choose the data, one of the very important aspects is generalizability. We need to ensure that data characterizes generalizability, and we cannot cherry pick the data, which introduces bias. Also, we have to ensure that data helps to characterize the population of interest. Once the data is chosen, understand the provenance of the data. If there are multiple sources for the data, document and specify the provenance cascade. Okay. Once the data is chosen and understood, the next step is data engineering. In this step, as a part of this step, we curate the data. We do data cleaning, account for missing data, and also standardize the data by mapping it to international standard terminologies or dictionaries as applicable. As a part of real-world data sources, there is some unstructured data too. If there is some unstructured data, extract the information with the help of both programmers and clinicians. Integrate the structured and unstructured data. The integration should happen at patient level from different sources of this RWD. And the next step is applying planned statistical methodologies using validated analytical platforms to derive evidence. And you define your statistical methodology, you apply it using all the analytical tools to derive evidence. But one of the important aspects once you generate this evidence is the validation of the evidence. Validation is a very key concept here, and the evidence should be validated at 4 different levels, namely data validation, software validation, statistical validation, and clinical validation. As a part of data validation, check if the data is captured right and as intended. Was the data collected as per the conventions? Ensure data is collected as intended. And then the next step is the next one is software validation. In the process, there are different sources for this data, and we have to ensure that all the softwares used here are doing what is expected of it. And the next one is statistical validation. There's the results after applying the statistical methodology, measure what was intended to, and then comes the clinical validation. And to what extent does the analysis conducted answers the clinical question of interest? So validation is a key concept, and the evidence needs to be validated. At this point, the data and evidence are generated and are shared in the form of reports or analysis to the stakeholders. But one has to ensure that the data or the analysis provided from the data is reproducible and transparent. Reproducibility is not just one of your peers running the code you have generated on their machine and getting the same results. It's more about applying the old analysis on the new data after years and still be able to infer the same things. We must also show that the chosen methods and results are accurate. We need to provide evidence for the chosen methods and the results. This improves transparency and also reduces the uncertainty for the decision makers. We must also enable to make use of or build on the chosen methods and created results. Thank you, and Ravi will speak to the need for interoperability with multiple data models and from different data networks being in place and its impact on programming.
All right. Thank you, Sushil. I'll dive right in. Well, from listening to the presenter so far, it does seem quite obvious that RWD is made up of multiple data standards, right? So let's now see what data models or standards already exist and what recommendations are out there in order to get to work with this data coherently. So we are talking about multiple data sources, right? That's where the interoperability concept kicks in. So many familiar models like Sentinel and pCoordinate, they already have a common data model established. However, some of these, they do not leverage the open data standards like CDISC or FHIR. So they don't have the interoperability built into them. But in order to be able to cater to rapidly growing needs of data sharing, I'm not talking just between organizations, but I'm talking data sharing between platforms and devices. There needs to be a more comprehensive set of standards, and they should be able to provide a common platform for the developers to integrate data faster than previously ever possible. So the question is there such a standard yet? Right? Now the answer is not quite yet, but there is a bright side to it. The industry and regulatory authorities, they already acknowledge this need. They see a gap in this. They have put together some great working groups who are diligently working towards this goal. Additionally, there's a group that Aditya already talked about, the Bipartisan Policy Center. This group is formed by former FDA heads and industry leaders of open standard consortiums. And this group have provided some inputs on RWD. So I thought it is worthwhile to quickly see what these recommendations are with regards to the standards of RWD. So in this recent guidance that was released just last month in August, several references and recommendations were made to adopt and to support API-enabled services using FHIR standards. So FHIR stands for Fast Health Interoperability Resources, and it has this APIs built into it, which lets the data of different formats to work together, right? In this document, there was also a mention about CMS releasing a proposed rule for its organizations to provide their enrollees access to their data electronically via open APIs using these FHIR standards. So let's talk very briefly about FHIR, right? I want to focus on the last word in this acronym, the resources. FHIR is essentially a huge set of resources that are put together very thoughtfully. These resources allow the users to accommodate or to work in a seamless manner with many different standards and data formats. That sounds fitting for RWD because RWD is made up of these different data sources and standards. Well, there's one more nice feature of this FHIR. It can be used as a framework for extending the existing resources. So the stakeholders can append the standards to what they already have. So they don't need to do anything entirely new, but just adopt this into what they're currently doing and still be able to achieve what they wanted to do, right? So summing it all up, we can tell that though these standards look promising and evolving, there is still work to be done. Through collaboration and sharing, we could expect to see more defined regulatory requirements on this in the coming years, right? So with that said, I'll pass the ball back to Sushil, and he will go over different softwares and platforms that one can use to actually process and analyze the data. Back to you, Sushil.
Thank you, Ravi, for the great information. As a programmer at heart, I couldn't help talking about technology. Leveraging the use of latest technology in the process of generating the evidence is inevitable, but where and how can we use it? We can use it in every step of the cycle I previously discussed. Like one of the examples is in data collection. There are cloud-based platforms that can collect and integrate like clinical genomic data, claims data, and patient-generated data. And we are hearing about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and natural language processing. But where can we use those? Like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and natural language processing techniques are used in data curation. Like for instance, to extract information from the unstructured data with accuracy. A more common example is when you go to a physician has a lot of notes, and there is a lot of information on that regarding the disease. So one can take that using machine learning techniques and natural language processing techniques. They can take data out of it and map it to standard terminologies. Also, ML and AI are used in predictive modeling and analytics that can help researchers better understand real-world etiology and also identify novel digital biomarkers and recognize some adherence patterns. Finally, machine learning and AI are used to analyze a large disparate data sets with ease. But how do we implement these ML, AI, and NLP techniques? So some of the softwares that can help us with most largest computational capacity are like Julia. Julia has got very high computational capacity, and there are other softwares like Python and R too. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I would like to pass on the ball to Narasimha for challenges in real-world data and real-world evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushil. That was very informative. And thank you also for rolling over the conversation. So far, my friends have illustrated so many good things about RWE. So it is clear from the current use of RWE in the US and elsewhere that some stakeholders see a great value in RWE and are exploring ways to make use of these data sources. However, several challenges were also identified based on literature review. I would want to discuss a few challenges and a few recommendations as well. A common reservation among all is around the quality of RWE. In practice, there is a variety of factors which will be discussed below: data curation, regulatory hurdles, data privacy, data mining, and universal agreement of the industry on standards. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Data curation. In the coming years, there will be emerging opportunities for making better use of real-world data within the US Food and Drug Administration's regulatory framework. To guide such decisions, FDA will be using key considerations. Does the trial or study design used to generate RWE provide adequate scientific evidence to answer or help answer the regulatory question of interest? Does the conduct of the study meet FDA regulatory requirements? As established in FDA's framework, a fundamental component of developing RWE that can support regulatory decisions will be an appropriate or fit-for-purpose dataset. Ensuring fitness for purpose will require addressing some of the most important questions related to the underlying RWD. There are various ways to describe and track the process of moving data from inputs to a fit-for-purpose dataset. Although widely accepted framework does not yet exist, few researchers have come up with a few options. The first stage extracting raw data from different sources, normalizing this data and database into databases that could be used for general research purpose, otherwise referred to as research-ready data. Transforming raw data into research-ready data involves cleaning, transforming, and linking raw data from its source into research-ready data. Study-specific data curation to establish a fit-for-purpose dataset. Additional study-specific data curation steps are being performed to develop a dataset from research-ready data. And one of the biggest challenges is linking these multiple data sources. The need to consider the techniques and criteria used to link structured data from claims, EHRs, and non-structured data. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Defining the scientific question which should be meaningful and answerable with RWD. Identifying the appropriate study design, selecting the RWD to be used, and defining data standards, analytical methods and strategy, complying with regulatory standards is a very important thing. In order to be usable, RWE must be generalizable across healthcare systems, clinically relevant, adaptable, efficient, and an accurate reflection of treatment effects, allowing RWD analysis to result in a meaningful insight. Ideally, these data should be gathered as a part of routine clinical care in a format that allows data analysis. Till date, RWD and RWE in the current drug development market have largely been applied in early discovery, the post-market phase of safety surveillance, and for comparative effectiveness evaluation. Although this is changing, health authorities must provide greater clarity on the acceptance of RWE in decision making and providing guidance on standards and best practices of both methodology and analysis when interrogating RWE. Adequately, regulatory guidance is not available for the design of RW studies which are acceptable. Privacy and consent issues, this will be later discussed by my friend Ravi as well, are likely to be very important as data gathering can only occur with the permission of individuals and populations. This strongly implies that public information is vital for this area of medicine to develop. This is a complex problem and beyond the scope to be discussed over here. The logical challenges of reconfiguring healthcare systems to gather usable RWD as a part of routine healthcare have not been addressed yet. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Data mining. Data mining occurs when analysts re-examine existing data sets to generate new information. Data mining is not inherently bad and can be used to generate useful information. However, the concern in the context of RWE is that commercial organizations can continue to reanalyze this data set using different modeling approaches until one that delivers preferential outcomes is identified. So technically, you're making it more biased. The vulnerability of RWE to manipulation via repeat analysis with non-disclosure of unhelpful results and underline the need for strict protocols, analysis plans, and well-defined research questions as well. Can we move to the next slide, please? Data access. This challenge is exacerbated by legal frameworks that legally restrict data sharing and access to patient identifiable information. This in turn can reduce the ability of healthcare organizations to share data so that it can be linked across different data sets. Even if researchers are aware that relevant data exists, data governance may mean that they are not able to access it, face delays in access, or can only access a subset of data. A balance needs to be struck between protection of private information and informing real-world research. The framework covers collection of raw data, cleaning and managing the data, linkage, aggregation, and access and usage of data. Can you move on to the next slide, please? I think this is one of the most common challenges, lack of industry agreements on these standards. Many of the challenges outlined so far are exacerbated by a lack of universally accepted standards or principles for the design, conduct, analysis, and reporting of RWE. This lack of consensus has meant that RWE is often not considered of high enough quality to be part of the body of evidence used to determine comparative effectiveness of different treatment options. This undercuts the potential value of the information that is produced, reducing the incentive to generate it. The RWE area is evolving so rapidly that standards are having a tough time to keep it up with the available changes in the market and the data. So lack of consensus has meant that RWE is often not considered to be high quality compared to trials and is not considered high quality for evidence-based medicine. In order for a set of standards to be useful, and as Aditya has already mentioned, stakeholder groups are required to buy into them and agree that they offer the most suitable guidance for the development, conduct, analysis, and reporting of RWE. Ideally, all the studies can then be conceptualized, designed, conducted, analyzed, and reported according to this common set of standards. This would increase the transparency, reliability, and trust in the results of RWE. Finally, I would want to conclude with a few recommendations. Can we go to the next slide, please? Increasing the quality and credibility of observational RWE studies is very important. Establishing effective governance arrangements that clarify how much data can be shared, and focusing on RWE efforts on the development of pragmatic clinical trials. I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I would like to pass on to our anonymization expert, Ravi, to talk about privacy, which is one of the most important challenges.
All right, thanks, Narasimha. It was great. Those are all valid challenges, and privacy is nothing less. So here, I would like to begin by giving a quick and simple demonstration of why data privacy is a much bigger concern when it comes to real-world data. So let's see how putting together pieces of information from just 4 resources will give us valuable information to identify this anonymous person. First piece is clinical trial data. So one can get access to age, sex, race, and drug information from this data, right? And the second is social media. It is very easy to get personal information, like on Facebook, you can look up your friends and family of a person. And third is pharmacy and billing information from the claims data. You can get credit card numbers, addresses, and other information from this. And the last one is the health information from wearables and medical devices. So uh, does putting this together look like we have all the information we need, right? Yes. So please note, in RWD, one or more of this information is already linked and is readily available for the attacker to identify the person of interest. So RWD could potentially give us this information more easily when we compare this to RCTs or other siloed data sources, right? So let's look at what else makes privacy an even bigger concern when it comes to RWD. In the puzzle on previous slide, we saw personal data coming from different sources, which are often owned by different companies and organizations. And this causes new complexities and challenges when we try to establish a common privacy standards, or when we try to design data anonymization techniques that are uniform across these companies. So before we get into more details on that, let's see whether the trial participants are willing to share their data or not. Recent studies showed that 93% of clinical trial participants are very or somewhat likely to share their data, but 1/3 of them, they did raise concern relating to data privacy and security. So patients does seem willing to contribute to RWD, as long as we can build their trust by paying attention to data privacy and security. So let's see what privacy laws already exist and where are the gaps in that. So there are two primary laws around this. Those are HIPAA and Revised Common Rule by HHS. Additionally, in response to the 21st Cures Act, which relates to our current topic, RWD, HHS released additional guidance on HIPAA just to address those gaps with those. But are they sufficient? Well, many organizations generating RWD are covered entities and business associates that fall under HIPAA. However, there's also an increasing number of companies like app developers, manufacturers of wearables, and social media sites, right? These hold a wealth of health information that can be leveraged for RWE, but these are not subject to existing privacy protections under HIPAA. So again, HHS and other regulatory agencies, they are working to put together a framework for using this health information that's not covered by HIPAA, and in order to improve trust among individuals and healthcare organizations. That sums up all the challenges that we commonly face when dealing with RWD or RWE. And coming next is Chris Hurley. He'll be concluding today's presentation with a superb analogy and key takeaways.
Expectations are high. Thanks, Ravi, and thanks, panel, for your great insights. You know, we work in a regulated industry with a lot of inertia in the way we conduct our research. We're very careful. We have to be. People's lives are at stake. We've talked about a number of concepts currently being adopted today, thanks in part to the foresight of our regulatory agencies here and abroad, but changing the course of the industry will simply take time. The integrity of the science behind the results and ultimately the safety of our patients relies on using valid and appropriate methods when we collect, clean, analyze, and report the underlying conventional and real-world data. There's an ocean of RWD out there, and with it, the opportunity to take this industry and our patients more quickly to great places of health and well-being. Thank you, Stephen and Elizabeth and the MichBio team for allowing us to participate in this webinar. And thank you, attendees of the webinar, for listening.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris, and everybody else at MMS Holdings. Very comprehensive. And for at least somebody like me who's been outside of drug development for a decade or more now, that went way over my head just by the sheer amount of information. Clearly a lot has changed since I've been doing drug development. In any case, open it up to the audience, the attendees, see if there's any questions. If there are, submit those through the chat, and we'll get them answered. Otherwise, you have the contact information here that you see on the slide to contact MMS directly if you have questions come up after today's call. Again, a reminder that this presentation is archived on our website. Members can find that in the member portal. If you have any trouble getting access, by all means, get in touch with MichBio and we'll help you out. So let's see here. At the moment, I don't see any questions from anybody in the audience. So going once, twice. All right, then that concludes today's webinar session. Again, Chris, gang at MMS, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and your information that you've provided today.
It was our pleasure, Stephen. Thank you.
That concludes
Thank you,
today's
Stephen.
session.
Thank you.